Please give a warm welcome for Maria Wheatley.
Thank you, Hugh. Well, thank you for that. It's great to be here at Origins, and thank you to Hugh and Andy for inviting me along to speak this afternoon. We're going to be having a look at the people of Stonehenge in the Neolithic, because the monuments that they left behind are just so fantastic, like Stonehenge, like Avebury, that sometimes it's easy to overlook the people, the women, the children, and the men. So that's what we're going to be having a look at, the people of Stonehenge. Now, when we think about Stonehenge, as we can see here, it's clear in our minds, we often think of the sun at midsummer. Well, maybe that's not the most accurate alignment, and we're going to find out that the moon was far more accurately aligned to the heel stone than the sun. But the goddess religion that's linked to the moon, that was, as we see, is linked to the people of Stonehenge, is ancient. It goes back. It's the longest standing religion or spiritual practice that mankind, humankind, has ever known. And when we look at some artifacts to have a look at its deep antiquity, we can see at the top that there was a stone found in East Serbia, and at first a fantastic archaeologist called Maria Gimbutas thought it represented the uterus, but after a while it was found that it was a lunar marker, and that's 32,000 years old from Serbia. So clearly the goddess and the moon was clearly being worshipped. And down the bottom we find an artifact from 30,000 years old from France, which was on a piece of wood carved quite beautifully. When we think about the Neolithic in Stonehenge, we want to think about phase one of Stonehenge that didn't look like the Stonehenge we're familiar with those huge trilithons. When we think of Neolithic Stonehenge, we think of the long barrows that we're going to have a look at, and we think about just a very large circle of 56 blue stones surrounded by like a double-henge white monument. That was Stonehenge in the Neolithic, long before the Saracens were brought in. So when we have a look at the long barrows, again, the brilliant Gimbutas said it represented the goddess in her fullness, as a person, as a living embodiment of the land. So I think that's what our ancient ancestors were doing. They were projecting themselves and their beauty and their divinity in the landscape. So we think of Neolithic long barrows as sometimes being megalithic. Yeah, they have standing stones in, just like the one at West Kennet Long Barrow near Avebury. And I'm sure lots of us here have been to West Kennet, haven't we, into a megalithic long barrow. Yay for West Kennet. So yeah, so that's what we're familiar with. But on the Salisbury Plain, they're very different. They're not really megalithic at all. In fact, when we have a kind of close look at the plain itself, I find it really surprising that our ancient ancestors, they adored the Salisbury Plain. They really did, because on that part of the landscape alone, which is about 26 miles by 26 miles, you have over 2,500 Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments in that very small area. It's absolutely astounding. And it's owned by the military. And shockingly so, what the military used to do with some of the long barrows on the Salisbury Plain is they used to test their tanks over the top of them, yeah, and drive over them to see how far they could get with their tanks. But testimony to the engineering skills of our ancestors, not one roof caved in, after tank after tank after tank. Well, according to Aubrey Burl, all of the long barrows, 9 out of 10 on the Salisbury Plain, are aligned to the moon, not the sun. And like we noticed earlier with the moon above Stonehenge, this is a goddess culture. And I'm going to be showing you what the people look like of this goddess culture, because there was definitely two types of humans, or two distinct races, together on the Salisbury Plain. And their story reads like an Agatha mystery novel. It's that amazing. But for those that haven't been on the Salisbury Plain, it's beautiful. She has a seductive charm and power that is second to none. You're on elevated ground. So if you're stood there, it feels like you can touch the heavens themselves. So no wonder our ancient ancestors loved this place. It is really a very special area. The air is sweet. And when William Stukeley went there in 1724, he said the air was so sweet with perfume of wild flowers, it was intoxicating. He fell in love with the area. But the Salisbury Plain is run by the military. You can fall in love and see her beauty and charm there, but you turn a corner and next you're seeing bombed out tanks. A mid-ancient site is quite surreal, so that's what part of the plain is. But again, you're very high up and you have a 360-degree skyline all around you. And despite sometimes with the boom, boom, boom echoing of the warfare that they practice on the Salisbury Plain, in a quiet moment, you hear the skylarks above you and it takes you back to the time of our ancestors. And again, you turn another corner and then you see what's called the red flag. And if you're navigating the Salisbury Plain, as I definitely can't, I take friends and Busty with me because I'd turn the wrong way. And if you turn towards the red flags, you're in live ammo area. Obviously not advised. And that's the sad part of the plain, because it is so rich in artifacts, it is so rich in skulls and people and our history and our holy history as well. It's sad that it's actually run by the military. I took some tours there, not last year, the year before, to bring the sacredness back to the plain, just to visit the sites that nobody bothers to visit because they're all at Avebury or they're all somewhere else, with a place where you can see things like the standing stones of Avebury. On the plain you can't, but there's so many ancient sites there. And there was this amazing woman called Maureen, and she decided to take this big piece of crystal to bring back the sacredness. Unbeknown to me, it was the largest military exercise being performed in Europe. So we're now heading up just past here, and Maureen has this moment where she says, I know what, I'm just going to throw the crystal and let the gods find out where it should go. She throws the crystal, but unfortunately we didn't see an armed officer just there, and the crystal landed bang on his chest. And then we were told, what the hell are you doing here? So Sebastian, my friend, went over and said, all they want to do is say a prayer. So they looked at us, it was absolutely mad, and we said our prayer and asked Maureen never to throw anything again on that tour. We were going to get thrown off. So that is the plain. You can go to an East European village, you can see bombed out houses, it's surreal. But when we have a look at nearby long barrows, like the beautiful West Kennet we mentioned earlier, we see all of the stone frontispiece here, and you go inside, as probably lots of us have, and there's a couple of chambers each side, and then two more and a far one. And it's all kind of earthed off now, but in antiquity it was beautiful shining white because of the chalk beneath the surface. But that's not how they were on the plain. Barrows did not look like that. They look something like this. This is was 7.5 miles south-southeast of Stonehenge. It's made of timber and it has a roof and it's very, very sturdy. That's the sort of barrow that the Stonehenge people built on the plain. And we can see the remnants of one here, which is way, way in military zone. Nobody has been to that for over 40 years. It's never been excavated apart from back in antiquity. You see, our ancient ancestors took inspiration from Europe. We were obviously trading and had deep, deep links, the Stonehenge people to Europe, because the idea of the long barrow didn't kind of just suddenly dawn on the people of Stonehenge. These were the long houses of the European people in a much, much earlier phase, from what's called the linear band ceramic culture, LBK culture, that archaeologists speak about. So that's where the idea of this wonderful monument comes from. This is called Fuzzle's Lodge. It's always interpreted as a tomb, a mortuary house. And in fact, all of these long barrows are said to be burial mounds. But I really do feel that they had different phases, and that one of their phases was long before they put the burial deposits in, they were using them for rituals, ceremonies, magic, or to meet up for whatever. These were living, breathing monuments. They weren't just for the dead. So I feel that the phase one of these monuments was very, very different to how, as we'll find out by the end of this lecture, what happened to the long barrows, why people were found in them. And even now, and I think it's one of the speakers next year at Megalithomania, Ronald Hutton, he even calls them shrine tombs now. The archaeologists are coming round to the fact that they're probably not all about burial. So when we think about these sort of barrows we're going to be having a look at on the Salisbury Plain, we think about these huge, long, trapezoid-shaped, rectangular longhouses as they were known in Europe. And incidentally, they are huge on the Salisbury Plain. Just like Stonehenge is different. Stonehenge is a different monument to anywhere else in the world. So are these long barrows. They're like snakes and serpents. And if I was stood on that end, you'd look like a tiny little person. From the distance, they are huge. So it takes quite a while to walk some of the mounds, not like West Kennet or the other barrows. And there's only one barrow really on the Salisbury Plain that's megalithic, and it's this one. It's called Tidcombe, and that does have a lot of megaliths right at the front protruding. But they got hacked into by antiquarians such as Aubrey, William Stukeley, and many others. That's why they appear dipped and kind of brutally hacked in, which is quite sad. A couple of years ago, I was in a really bad space because I was having a tax audit and I was accused of earning thousands of pounds, I wish. But I was going through this tax audit and I was really kind of feeling guilty, though I had no reason to be guilty. And a friend of mine said, "You have to get distracted. Otherwise you're going to go for a breakdown. You have to get distracted." So I thought, what can I distract myself for? And then I thought, megaliths. That's my middle name, and searching the paranormal should be my second name. So I thought, I'll go to my megalithic heart, where my passion really lies. And my father taught me what's called the 2-point fix in dowsing. And that's where you get, literally say like at the top of that screen, you dowse along, and if you get a dowsing reaction, you draw a vertical line down, and you do same the other way, so you get a big X on a map or a piece of paper or whatever you're looking for. So I thought, well, I've got to distract myself. I'm going to get a huge map of Stonehenge. I'm going to ask the great goddess, guide me to find something. If you've got a story to tell it to me, and I'll use this spiritual 2-point fix. So I'm trying to communicate with the land, and I'm trying to do this. And each time I did it, I arrived at the same place all of the time. And I thought, what is it? It's just a long barrow. You know, what's special about this barrow? And so, guided by dowsing on one cold, freezing cold February morning, I went to this massive long barrow. It's the largest in northwest Europe. It is huge, and it's 390 feet long, and it has 70 times the volume of any other plain barrow. So whoever were building these mounds were doing it in a spectacular style. Yeah, massive. It will take you quite some time to walk to each end. And a natural processional way through the most beautiful beech trees guides you to this point. There's trees either side, but you walk down, only if the red flag isn't flying on the Salisbury Plain, of course. You walk down this avenue and the trees sway, and in the summer you hear their leaves, and it's almost like you could hear the past speaking with the leaves. It's very beautiful. So this is where dowsing got me. So I arrived there on that cold day. I lie on top of the barrow, really getting colder and colder. I just said, tell me your story. What is it? Why am I here? Why am I here on this day on Salisbury Plain? So there was I, led there, and I often sort of, write my intent down on a piece of paper, and I push it gently just into the grass. And I said, whatever, guide me. And then I decided to go back to a lot of antiquarian books, because I'm really lucky, because my father left me a huge library, lots of unpublished surveys by a master dowser called Guy Underwood, and I thought I'd have a shuffle through all of these papers, look through all of these old books, these first edition books and things, and we'll see if I can find out anything about this barrow. And I did. I read one report that strangely Guy had kept, my dad had kept, and it was like I'd felt really guided. And I thought, wow, it's only one person buried here. That is so, so unusual. Because if we look to West Kennet and all the other long barrows, they house sometimes up to 50, 60, 70 people. So when the antiquarians dug into this, they thought they would find hordes of people. They didn't. They found one person and one person alone. It was lead right in the middle, very unusual. Normally you get it at one end. So I thought, wow, one person. This must be a really important person, because they're in the biggest long barrow that's ever been constructed. Who is this person? What was their life like? What kinds of foods did they have? You can find out so much by looking into the early archaeological reports and newspaper clippings. And I found that it was a woman as well. We hardly hear of the women of prehistory. You ask, go into any archaeological book, and it's always a him, a him, a him. Even though like the bush barrow, it's a male. Where are the females of prehistory? Well, here was one. And she had a noble burial. And the antiquarians were quite shocked that it was a woman. They really didn't expect to find her. And then the next shock happened. She had been really brutally murdered. So when I read that report, I thought, I've got to track her down. I want to see her. I want to be in her space and find out who she is and what she looked like. It's really difficult trying to track down some artifacts through the British Museum and through Salisbury Museum and through Devizes Museum. You get on this like roundabout of, I haven't got it, I haven't got it, I haven't got it. And I really felt I should persist with this inquiry. And eventually it got tracked down to Cambridge University. So I thought, well, I'll go in to see if I can visit it. And after filling in lots of different paperwork, they allowed me to go in and to see her. And you had to go in under a scholarship. You can't, again, this is what I find very bad about universities and the elite systems that they create. Because if you're just an average person, I'm just an average person wanting to do research, it's, oh, you have to write a paper, why are you here, why are you doing this? So I'm actually I run an esoteric college, which is affiliated to a much wider, very respected association. So I signed in under them and kind of scribbled esoteric college. So you could hardly read it like spiders. And they said, oh yeah, you can go in and see her. And they had the skull out. And as soon as I saw the skull, I realized it was very long and very elongated in shape. And do you know what? We have to sometimes blend our kind of left brain with our right brain to get to a holistic truth about our ancient ancestors, I feel. So, unbeknown to the curator that was by me, and with an official clipboard, I mean, it's like something out of a cartoon. They actually do carry these around. And she's got her clipboard, and I'm saying, Great Spirit, hear me now. Get her out of the room. Get her out of the room for 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes alone with this wonderful, noble woman. So I kind of prayed, and the next minute her phone went, thank you, Great Spirit. And off she went and said to me and Busty Taylor, we're allowed one photograph. You'll only take one photograph, won't you? I've got to go, well, yeah, you can trust us. Click, 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 click. Quick, lift it up. And it was that side down. It was a brilliant moment, yes, to Great Spirit. And then what I do, because I'm quite sensitive, I wanted to feel around her third eye. I wanted to feel over her crown chakra. And I really wanted to communicate with her throat chakra. Tell me your story. Who are you? What are you about? Because they've tattooed her on quite a few bits, and they call it Old Ditch Barrow. That's what it's called. Yeah, I know, it's absolutely shocking. It really is. But she has a power and a presence, even when she was, 4,500 years of death. It didn't take away her dignity, and it didn't take away her inner beauty and charm. And one thing I did notice when said curator was out of the room, just like Brian Foster and others say, she misses a suture going right the way down. She's only got 2, which is very familiar with the Peruvians and very familiar with some East European skulls as well. So she fell into that category, and I thought that was quite fascinating. And of course I only took one photograph, but here's the second one where it just shows you it going right the way down. And can you see her? She's tattooed there, 1865. And then I said to her, really excited, suggested to Oxford University, why don't we go for DNA testing? Did she come from Europe? Where's this person from? It was like, well, no, we're not. It's contaminated. And they say it's contaminated because, unfortunately, it has, in part, been glued together. But underneath, because, of course, I didn't lift it up, and, of course, Bussy didn't lift it up, but when we had a look at her underneath, she's got all quite a few teeth in place, and you could take something there, at least an isotope or something. So I thought, wow, here's this noble woman. She's being killed. Why? And I thought, I've got to find out. There was some driving energy that I really felt inspired by. So I thought, well, okay, that's her barrow on the Salisbury Plain. What about the other barrows on Salisbury Plain? Who do they contain? Where's the children? Nobody talks about the children of the Neolithic, for example. I've got lots of samples that I've been looking at how children lived in the Neolithic, especially those with the long skulls, because their story's never been told. It's always normally about adults. But when we have a look at the nearby barrows around the area, again, I find it very, either this mad lot of synchronicity going on in favour of the military, but wherever you have these strange barrows that have a lot of mass murders in, as we'll see, that's what it is in a moment, you can't get there. Access is completely denied everywhere. And obviously you cannot go onto that part of the Salisbury Plain. But if I could have gone into this part of Salisbury Plain and followed that ancient track, and tracks are really ancient monuments. I studied with Wessex Archaeology probably about 10, 15 years ago now. I don't know where time goes. And one thing for our exam, we were told, you've got to remember this, you've got to remember it. The tracks are the most ancient monuments in the landscape. Look at the tracks and the tracks will lead you somewhere. So I remember Bob Clark telling me that for my exam, and that track takes you to a huge elevated place. Can you see the horizon line there? It takes you to the most exalted place on the plain. And again, these barrows, they kind of look like how kids draw roofs on houses. And all of the barrows, if you imagine you've got that huge, huge long barrow that I call the Neolithic High Queen. She was a queen or she was a priestess. She had special status. Now, all the barrows that surround her in these shapes, they too contained murder victims. It was like something went down at Stonehenge in the Neolithic. Why were these people despised? Yeah? What happened? What was going on in their lives? We see in this barrow, one male was violently attacked, really badly. He had defense wounds. This was a close quarter killing for someone to do that with. But ceremonially placed right in the center of a barrow was a different burial. And it was of a round skull person, like the skulls that you and I have, but surrounded by literally hacked to pieces of elongated skulled people. So something changed in their lives that we'll have a look at, where they were violently attacked. And not just that, if that's not a kind of strange story that archaeologists have never told, which I find is quite strange that all of this is kind of took somebody like me to research, and why aren't the archaeologists talking about it? But a thing I found even stranger with their story is when some of the people with the long skulls had been killed and placed into these barrows, probably round about 500 years later, they were taken out of the barrow. their skulls and their long bones. They were common artifacts that went into these barrows. And then they were smashed up again. It's like they were beaten up once in life, and then they were taken out and smashed again. And I call them the twice killed, because they were really, really despised, and their memory lived on for 500 years to be unceremoniously dug back out and to be killed again. One of the deepest barrows, which is this one here, in fact it's not even on an OS map. You're on the Salisbury Plain now, so GPS is always going to be out, yeah? Your GPS is going to be out and your maps are going to be out, mainly because, you know, if you've got a good coordinate GPS on the Salisbury Plain, you only got some, you know, nutter to come along and to put a bomb into it, so everything is off on the plain. And then they do change their coordinates, and I think they've had a coordinate change just recently, because I live in a town called Marlborough, and even though I'm 17 miles to the north of Salisbury Plain, they're really gearing up. Boom, boom, boom. On Tuesdays and Thursdays. I don't know why they play their war games on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They like that. But when you go right into the depths of these barrows, there were even more skulls. And again, it seemed to be that there's these two types of people, one with a round skull, one with an elongated skull, that at one time were definitely living side by side, probably peacefully, yeah? And this skull was reconstructed by an antiquarian, and he literally glued it all back together and thought, wow, it was one of the longest skulls that he'd ever seen, far longer than the Neolithic High Queen. And it got lost in transit. He just literally drew it out, took all of the measurements, and then realized, you know, it was supposed to have gone off to London, and then it got lost in transit. And that didn't happen just once. It didn't happen just twice. Near enough, every other artifact was beginning to be lost on the train. Well, you think you've got two things going missing. You're not going to use the same system again, would be a normal reckoning, but no, they kept losing them all, which adds intrigue into our inquiring. And this barrow here is a smaller barrow, and this one contained a skull of a child, yeah, and some teenagers. So this was built just for them. And their story must have been quite tragic, because one of the teenage boys, and they know that through the skull shape and age and things, he had his arms hacked off, boom, like that, which is probably some sort of like ritual killing. And I felt those children must have been so petrified. And there is something very chilling about being close to that barrow. It's almost like you sense anxiousness and sorrow as you approach these barrows. And if, before you go out into the ancient landscape, you just take a few moments to center yourself and to get some calm in your life, and then to just walk towards these barrows, they talk. They have a language where they speak to you by making you feel what is there in the land. And even the most skeptic people have found that on the barrows I've taken them to on the Salisbury Plain. But there was one barrow, apart from the Neolithic Queen, that really did stand out. And it's this barrow here. Again, they open it up once a year for visitors. And this is in the Neolithic, probably round about the period with using orthodox dating, 3800 BC, could have been a bit earlier. The skulls of just males in the prime of their life and a few children were put into this tomb here in its last phase of activity, because like I said earlier, I think they were being used for something else. One male was beheaded in front of the people there, because they seemed to be put in there at the same time, and there was a layer of blood right at the bottom, so they must have just been piled in some act of genocide there. And if they wanted to keep them there, rob them of their story, rob them of their voice, because they put layers of stone on top of them, bluestones, which would be later introduced into Stonehenge, and sarsen stone as well. So clearly our ancient ancestors were transporting sarsen and bluestone long before Stonehenge was being built for them to be here, but they were sealed down on their skulls as if to say, you know, we're not going to be remembering you. There was something about these people that spooked them out. Again, one lost artefact of a male that came from this barrow was drawn by Dr. Thurnham in the 1800s. And again, he puts in the sutures, you see, and it's missing the third one that goes right the way down the middle. And that smash is, boom, a ceremonial killing. And the people of the Salisbury Plain were very different, I feel, from the Europeans. This is our ancient Britons, and they weren't giants. I mean, Hugh looks for the giants. These weren't, and I'm not very tall. I'm only about 5'4", wearing heels today to try and look a little bit taller, but I'm only sort of about 5'4". And what I found fascinating about these people, they were all short. They were about sort of 5 feet in height, and that was found out through their bones. But a bit like what Andy Collins has spoken about in his Origins talk last year about the jaws being larger in the Europeans that have elongated skulls, that does seem to be the same for the people that came from the Stonehenge area. Although, like I say, they were very short people. And when we compare their skulls to other the Allens people, for example, they do look quite similar in stance. So I think this was, you know, probably coming all the way out of maybe the Middle East or Europe. So they have an origins, they have a genesis somewhere. So when we kind of look even further back to the Mesolithic period, which goes back to say 7000 BC, and we go to Serbia, we can see, for instance, that when we compare the Neolithic queen to a burial here, a very unusual burial that looks in a meditative position, very, very long skulls on them. And to the ancient Celtic people, the Druids, which, you know, all the archaeologists quite rightly say, is that the Druids had nothing to do with Stonehenge or Avebury. Indeed, they did not, because they were from the Iron Age, from Latane area in the Czech Republic. But I do really feel that there was a spirituality being practiced by the Bronze Age people, inherited probably from the Neolithic, that got blended with the Iron Age Druidic tradition. Because you look to standing stones and they have alignments to those 8 sacred Sabbats that Wiccans, witches and Druids today still celebrate, like Beltane, Imbolc. And there's a Druid way where I suppose in a way, and I'm kind of guilty of this, we look to the east for the magic. We look to the east for the chakra systems. We look to the east when if we look down to our own land upon which we live, there is a tradition of chakras and magic steeped in Western mysticism. Now that kind of stance of those butterfly legs appears in some Iron Age artwork. And when we have a look at here, this is from a very famous cauldron, and this is made in Ireland, the kind of metal looking one, and they have these poses. We see in Druidism, we don't have you have 7 chakras of the Eastern philosophy, but to the Druids of old Iron Age Britain, there was 3 magic cauldrons, and the cauldrons had to be activated, and they spin just like a chakra. And you have the cauldron by your belly or by your womb, whether you're a man or a woman. Then your next cauldron of activity in an alchemic change is by the solar plexus, and your 3rd cauldron is always over your crown chakra. So to the Iron Age Druids, you activate it by putting your kind of legs in a butterfly position, and you activate your cauldron chakras. And I think the Mesolithic burial reflects this very ancient Iron Age tradition. And it is said that if you have this alchemic marriage of your cauldron, a cauldron is a woman's womb. It could be either the skull of the goddess, Ceridwen of old Celtic Druid lore. Once these are completely activated, you become the poet, which is the bard. You become the Ovid, which is the healer, the prophecy, and you become the druid, which is all about administering justice and wisdom. And that's the 3 stages of initiation, which I think is always in the land. Because what I've noticed, and so did my late father, especially on long barrows, if you take away the concept of lays and you take away the concepts of earth energies, there's an association which man left as a remnant. Yeah? Because it's like, say I was going to walk along here, yeah, and someone's got some dowsing rods and I walk along and then I leave a trail. Wherever I go, I leave activity of that which I've done. Yeah, it's a real pain if you're looking for missing people, for example, because you have to say, is that a remnants trail? Is it this? Is it that? And anyway, it leaves behind something in the land. And what we noticed for over 20 years, that when it comes to long barrows, they leave behind 3 traces. The Druids always used to speak in triads, for instance. Everything was the sacred 3, the mystical 3 that the Christians nicked and turned into the Holy Spirit. So these long barrows contain almost like 3 big pulsation points. That if you used a divining rod to walk along that barrow, you'd have huge reactions to that. And I think this goes back to the cauldron wisdom of Ceridwen, our goddess. Now this is a wonderful long barrow called Belisnap, and I'm sure quite a few of us have been to Belisnap, have we? Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. It's really, really beautiful. And it has what is called this false front. It's very Taurian looking with these huge horns that come round. Well, there's an archaeologist called Neil Brodie, and he looked into Belisnap, and he realised that shoved into that false entrance, because the other entrances are either side, the chambers rather, he found a very elongated skull placed right next to a round skull person, but almost like they were looking at one another, face to face, like chakras to chakras, or cauldrons to cauldrons, as us Druids should say. So he noticed that, so he thought they were living side by side in the ritual landscape, making monuments. And I've been to Malta. Malta's fantastic. I love Malta. That's land of the goddess, isn't it? They've even got a word for father, so I kind of like that. But been a bit too yin, probably. And here's the Maltese skull there, placed next to the Neolithic queen. They're very similar. Well, I was in Malta not so long ago, actually, with the wonderful James Swagger of Megalithic Odyssey, and each time, wherever we go, there's either some kind of drama or something mad happens. So now we're wanting to investigate, because he's seen on Ancient Aliens, James, and we want to go and see the elongated skulls. And they refused us access, and they're going out of their way now to show us all of these round skulls, but you know, they're not buying into any of it and saying they want to see the long skulls. And in the end, they asked us to leave when we had to leave. But they again, why did they show them to Ancient Aliens? And yet here we are, we're into megaliths, not necessarily Ancient Aliens, and we were denied all access to that. I find unbelievable. And same in Sardinia. There's lots of long skulls of Sardinia as well, which I know Scott's going to be talking at Megalithomania about, and he's done some wonderful research into that. I wanted to find out as well, what sort of monuments did these people build? And you know, what meaning did it have in their lives? And what I started to notice, this is a Lugbury, on the kind of far Wiltshire border. This is a drone shot with me there. I noticed they were very elongated in shape, yeah? And there was a lot of elongated people put into this one. And when we have a look from the Guy Underwood collection, he went there and had a look, and he noticed that one was perfectly clean. And it didn't have any artifact in. We can see there was women and children and males and mixed adults. All of the elongated ones and this elongated type of monument. So I thought, I wonder if that's just a coincidence or not. So I started to look at the other monuments that these people were building. Could have been under the direction of our Neolithic High Queen, could have been under the direction of a prince for all we know. But when you start to look at the timescales of these people, they do tend to build elongated objects. I mean, this is the giant cursus that once stood in front of Stonehenge, which according to Mike Parker Pearson has no entrance. Yeah. So these were 6 foot, maybe even 10 feet chalk walls, yeah, with no entrance. And again, archaeologists fascinated by death, because that's all they talk about. Oh, it's for death rites. Well, if it indeed is for death rites, how do I get into that monument? Do I slide down and just fall into it? What were our ancient ancestors looking for? Many years ago, we went to the esoteric center of this monument, because the esoteric center of something is a really powerful concept to the Druids. It's the genie of the land. You do a house clearing, you go to the esoteric center. And this is why the Masons and the Bilderbergs and all those shape-shifting lizards, or whoever they are, they always build a massive stately home. And you go down a sweeping drive to arrive at the esoteric center. It gives you power. So if you activate anything, you do from the center, from your heart, and to the esoteric center of wherever you are. So we went to the esoteric center of the Cursus monument and found out that there was massive flares of radiation coming out of the ground. You go anywhere else in the Cursus, outside, and it didn't happen, just at the esoteric center. Why is that? It's inexplicable. Could it be that these ancient people who are portrayed time and time again by the archaeologists to be bedraggled hair and dressed in skins? You know, that's the Neolithic people, like a Saxon eating a piece of chicken or something. It's a horrible, horrible image where they must have known to place that there was this gamma radiation coming out of the land. But more than that, as a water diviner brought up with dowsing the land and things, there's something very special about the Stonehenge environs. There's really something special, because there's a particular type of water. Water that is born within the womb of Gaia, that is independent of rainfall. Yeah. Now, a geologist would now say, you know, you're a nutter. That doesn't happen. Yeah, the Earth can't generate her own water. You know, you're being ridiculous. But I will say to you pretty soon, planets, water will be on all of the planets, because it's something the planetary body does. Earth, Gaia, is more fluidic on the inside of her. She has more water on the inside, like the oceans on the outside. She's fluidic. And she can produce water. She produces sulfur, gold. Why not water? Where you have a special type of water in the ground, our ancient ancestors divined the land, I believe, and looked for it and found it, because it generates a frequency that makes you feel calm, and it generates higher frequencies that you could manipulate if you wanted to make something like free energy or things like that. It's hotly debated, but is a possibility. So my late father, Guy Underwood, all the master dowsers said the cursus marks a symbolic river flowing many, many miles down into the land. And it's very hard to prove these things. But again, isn't it the magic when you start to look to the ancient past? Things change in your life. And what I found myself once, I'd taken a friend around who's really helped me out on my new book about Stonehenge and monuments in Europe. He's a mathematician that is looking into, we've changed earth energies into sound, and it's going to be a whole new way of looking at the ancient landscape. He's helped me out so much. I said, he doesn't want his name known yet, 'cause he's a professor, but he's my left brain. He's fantastic. Anyway, he'd helped me out so much. I thought for a kind of treat, I'd take him and his wife out, and I'd say, you've got private access to Stonehenge with us. We're going to look around the stones, and we're going to have a wonderful time. And we did, and had a wonderful time, and he's so insightful. And then I noticed when I looked towards the cursors, there was a mist. Mists only happen with water, yeah, and exactly flowing down all of the way of the cursors, and the cursors alone, you have this wonderful mist rising out of the land to prove that there is a huge river, yeah, of what I call powerful yin water. Now, this water has a numerical code according to John Michel. It's 1080, opposite 666, which is a solar, more aggressive force. And just like the new and the full moon makes the tides come in and the tides go out, for example, the inner waters don't relate to those lunar periods. They relate, according to ancient traditions, to the first and last quarter. And the Druids said 6 days after the new or the full moon is when I shall pick my mistletoe, is when I shall go for my snake's eggs, for instance. 6 days after the new or full moon. Their year even started 6 days after the vernal equinox. And it's on these 6 days that the earth energies rise in their power. From the land, and that proves that there's a lake there. And there are other elongated monuments. This is Lan Hill Long Barrow near Chippenham, very elongated. But that's not the only monuments that these people created. They created, for example, causewayed enclosures, very enigmatic because they have a ditch and a gap, a ditch and a gap. And archaeologists at one time said they were for cattle. Well, it's a bit stupid. The cattle are going to walk out, aren't they, through all of the little gaps? Why would you have that? It's the threefold, yeah, the threefold of our ancient law. Even its whole shape is elongated. So these were the monuments that they were creating. But on top of all of that and in between, you had this beautiful timber work, highly painted. And even in the Avebury area, you have the largest causewayed enclosure left, which is Windmill Hill, which is a lovely photograph from Busty Taylor. Now, around about the time of phase 1 of Stonehenge I was talking to you about earlier, here's a picture drawn by Aubrey Burle, a very famous archaeologist, who's always pointed out that the moon at the mid-swing position of its 18.61 year cycle arises more accurately above the heel stone than it does the midsummer sunrise. It stands at a latitude, Stonehenge, of 51 degrees, and that's precisely where the moon rises. And Aubrey Burle and Clive Ruggles, for many, many years, have constantly said that who made that solar sunrise very famous at Stonehenge? Professor Richard Atkinson, whose publishing company hired a photographer to stand 2 meters away from the center axis line of Stonehenge and manipulated the shot for his Stonehenge book because the midsummer sunrise is off. They were monitoring the 18.61 year, but only the moon at mid-swing and the moon in its northernmost moonrise. Now, when you were at Stonehenge, it was a narrow entrance, yeah, dedicated to the moon and to the moon alone. And all of those A posts, as it's called, were monitoring that cycle, yeah. And then they put up 56 bluestones into a wonderful henge monument. So we've got the moon at northeast. Can you imagine being there every 9 years and you see that huge full moon rise above the heel stone? Happened a couple of years ago. So decided to go there with a chap called Gary Evans. Unfortunately, it was really cloudy and there was no one else there to even sort of celebrate it. Right, the other entrance at Stonehenge is in the south, and the south is where the full moon at midnight majestically rises up. This was a temple dedicated to the lunar goddess. And even if you look at the 56 holes and you like maths, which I don't, but you have 3 times 18.61, it gives you 55.95. This was a temple dedicated to the goddess, but something happened. Something happened in the Stonehenge environs. And when I studied archaeology with Wessex archaeologists, they said, sweeping statement, round about 2500 BC, they sealed all the tombs off, sealed them off. And what do you mean sealed them off? Well, they got lots of compact earth and pottery, layered, like they were putting in a library actually. But anyway, they put all of the earth in, and in the style of Indiana Jones, boom, they put a blocking stone in front. That's when I think the elongated skulls went in, and they blocked them off for all time. Yeah, and I always used to say, why? Oh, well, we don't know why. That always lingered in the back of my mind. How can you study archaeology and a fantastic question raises itself and you have no answer for? So I think the elongated skulls were placed into these barrows and their story was shut off. Then change came. The round skull people were becoming more dominant in the landscape. They went back to Stonehenge, and remember our really narrow entrance? They widened it much further back to really manipulate the sun. The moon had gone and the sun's dominance was coming in. And then the barrows changed that the people were even placed in. They became round. And this is a round barrow from the cursus barrows that lies close to Stonehenge. And here we have another load of the cursus barrows. So it's like the roundness of the monuments changed. And all of a sudden you had stone circles being built, round barrows. So it's like they had dominance. There was an end of the elongated ones, and the round skull masculine society began to develop, where the son became more important than the female because they were having a kind of solar hierarchy. But that wasn't the end of the story of Stonehenge and the elongated people. Archaeologists really talk a lot about the Amesbury Archer, don't they? I'm sure we've heard of the Amesbury Archer. Yeah? And the Boscombe Bowman. Yeah? Gets really good press. You go to the Salisbury Museum and then you say, oh, you know, can I see the Amesbury Archer? And there he is on full display with all the arrows around. And you think, wow. And the Boscombe Bowman, a little bit of a lesser kind of find because that was an emergency excavation because Solstice Park, Holiday Inn was being built around that area and housing estates. So, yeah, great. So they were, you know, building on top of these. They found the Boscombe Bowman, which was done by Wessex Archaeology. They did a fantastic job there because, you know, I know a lot of people slate archaeologists off, but Bob Clark was on his hands and knees that night because the construction company couldn't give a shit that there was this beautiful person in the land that he was trying to excavate. And he had to have his car lights on there, and all the students were helping dig him out of the dirt. But there was one left. The elongated people must have still had some prevalence around the Stonehenge area. Yeah, they must have done. And perhaps they were interbreeding now with the round-skulled people because this is the last of the elongated people, I call this, this person. Now, he was found. Again, I just love Stonehenge. I love about the magic of the monuments rather than the maths, rather than the astronomy. There is a magic in these ancient sites. And this was an excavation happening in the 70s under the direction of Richard Atkinson. And Atkinson was digging away, and then they stopped the dig, and all of a sudden the ditch collapsed, yeah, in front of their eyes. And they found this person that had the cross now between an elongated skull and a round skull. Possibly, I think he may have been an interbreeding one. But he was ritualistically killed in Stonehenge. At close range, he was shot in the back, yeah, and then he was shot again. And in fact, when they had a really close look at the bones, they could even find the flint arrowhead in it. Who shot him 4 times? He was there by the entrance, the solar entrance now to Stonehenge, not the lunar one, and bang, he was brought down and placed in the ditch. He must have been an archer because he had bracers there, and they came probably from the north, yeah? So this person was moving around. He could have been in Antrim, County Antrim, Scotland, and they were left deposited with him, which if we have a quick look, again, this is a northern pot that was put in with him, so I think he has links to the north of the country. So he was the last, really, of the elongated ones. After that, it became a solar culture, and it became a place where the moon was forgotten, a place where the sun began to worship. But I think back in her day, back in her Neolithic primehood, this beautiful, short, long-skulled woman, I think, was the high priestess. I think it was she that designed the early phase 1 of Stonehenge. I think that was born from her brain and manifested. She did an awful lot to have been buried in that huge, huge long barrow. So, when we think about these wonderful monuments, spare a moment when you are fascinated by the pyramids and fascinated by the trilithons above you, and think of the people, the women and the men and the children of prehistory, because I feel that their story has only just begun. Thank you.